what I see right now is that there is some chatter. There is some chatter, so I understand that some people have felt unwelcome. Hey, Mom.
Thank you for being here, Mom.
I wanted to make sure we had at least a few people in the audience, so thanks for being here. But there's been plenty of times where we have felt unwelcome, and that's what we're trying to solve today. So you are in the right spot. Welcome to Intentional Design. And can you also change the slide to our QR code so you can find us later? And so in our brief time together, we're going to talk about how to create intentional design. But first, I think we need to define the problem. And it's hard for us to imagine what's it like to be a Muslim transgender person in a wheelchair going to a conference in Florida, right? We can't really understand what this is going to be like, but we also know that there are layers of obstacles, layers and layers and layers. And so for this to be welcoming, we actually have to be very intentional. So think about this. Let's say marketing. Let's think of a industry meeting just coming up, and all the marketing are 30-somethings. They look like supermodels, and they're white males. How many of you relate to that? Okay, funny. So marketing is really important, and I want to share with you an example that Legos is doing. Legos has a new campaign, and they have these new minifigures. And what they did is last year they conducted this study, and they found out there was an overwhelming response to have more diversity. So now they have different color skin tones, as well as Down syndrome and different numbers of limbs. And there is also a dog that is in a wheelchair. So if a toy company is doing this, shouldn't we in the event industry? Yes, we should. So that is what we're trying to solve today. So let's first start with our land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that our event is on the stolen Coast Salish land, specifically the ancestral land of the Suquamish, Duwamish, and Stillaquamish and Muckleshoot people. So we offer land acknowledgements because native land was taken by force so we could colonize and make the United States. So this is the first step in opposing the systemic oppression and historic erasure of Native people and Native land ownership. So how many of you have been at an event that has had a land acknowledgement? Okay, probably half of you. So some of you who haven't, this is pretty much a standard in Seattle. I have not seen it in the event industry, but outside of the event industry, we always do land acknowledgements. So we will have a resource page so you can learn more about that. That's another way you could be more inclusive. This is also recorded because not everybody can be here physically. And there also will be a transcript. So I need this page so I can say what my name is. So my name is Jolene Jang, and some of you, like Monique, knew me from like 20 years ago in my fund specialist days. So I'm doing some different things now. Now I'm going to start with the visual descriptions. So we do this both in person and virtually so people with low vision can have a better understanding of who's talking. So I am a middle-aged Asian American, and I'm wearing this pink suit, and my hair is kind of messy loose curls. I am ethnically Japanese and Chinese and Swedish, and I came from these two in the front. So Chinese and Swedish, so my mom is Japanese. And I'm culturally Japanese American. I use she and her. And most of my time, in my 26 years, I have done a lot of team building of bringing people together and bringing smiles. I'm doing something different now. And with the rash of attacks of Asian Americans, on Asian Americans, I now talk about the plight of Asian Americans and how to be inclusive. So with that, let me introduce our first panelist. So DC Evans, and she was the recent award winner of the Emerald City Applause Awards People's Choice. So please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm DC Evans. I'm the owner of Kind & Company Events. We're an event management company here in Seattle. We help nonprofits, corporate events, and social events do their fundraisers because we all need some fun. I am a African-American woman wearing a yellow jacket with a curly ponytail. It's very cute. Tomorrow will be straight. And I appreciate you all being here with us today.
I want to say something about Gary. So Gary Murakami, he is the recent winner of the Visionary Award, PCMA Visionary Award for the Groundbreaker. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gary Murakami. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Industry Relations for Teneo Hospitality Group. For those of you who not familiar with Teneo, we're a representation company of independent and small branded hotels, as well as DMCs around the world. So I describe myself as a third-generation Japanese American, part of the LGBT community, dressed today in what I consider a uniform for not only Northern California, but the Pacific Northwest, in jeans, a blazer, and a dress shirt, and a sweater. So can't get any more traditional than that, or as my friends always say, blah, right? So I tend to stay inside the box in many things in terms of my dress and attire. I go by he, him, his, and I am an advocate for the DEI community, DEI, as well as the LGBT community. So I find myself doing a lot related to inclusion, diversity, and equity. So thank you.
Thank you. So John Chen, I want to mention him. We both did team building a long time ago, and the people you will see out there, the Asians that are a little, and so he also is a PCMA Visionary nominee, and also the founder of API Event Profs, which I think he will tell us about. John.
You know, I could only start this intro with, thank you very much. No, my name is John Chen. I am the author of Engaging Virtual Meetings. This is my 26th year of being business for myself. Thank you very much. And I'm a 55-year-old Asian American third generation male. And today I'm rocking the purple and green suit as we were trying to find some contrast for our dark background back here. And I go by the pronouns he, him. And what we're doing here in these visual descriptors is really a best practice, not only in person, but in virtual, that can really help no matter where your audience may be, especially those who might be sight challenged with that. And would you like me to add a little bit about API?
Yes, please, API Event Profs.
So check this out, right? Many of us know, raise your hand if you know this, right? What's the most popular hashtag in the event professional industry? Just shout it out. Event Profs, that's perfect. Thank you, Shauna, and others back there. So nobody in the history of Facebook had ever thought to create a Facebook group called API Event Profs. And just to be clear, right, API stands for Asian Pacific Islander. And it represents 50 countries and 100 dialects. And so many other affinity groups in especially the events industry and other industries have found power by collecting together, right? There is a Black NSA, there is an LGBTQ group that's very strong in the MPI industry, and there had never been an API group until about 2 years ago. And so we were.
What do we do? What do we do, John?
Well, there are three of us here that are co-founders, and there are many of us who also have joined along with us. And what we're doing now is that we're really looking to forward this experience, welcome people who are Asian Pacific Islanders who are in the event industry, and also solve challenges such as, while many of us who are Asian Pacific Islanders, statistically, we have twice as many advanced degrees, like a bachelor's and higher, we also hold less than half of the executive jobs. And these are things that we would like to change.
And you can get involved. We'll have a resource page for you, but hashtag right now if you're like, oh, I don't know, let me check it out. LinkedIn, hashtag API Event Profs. We have two meetings a month as well, so thank you. Okay, so in our discussion today, we are also going to touch upon how do you get to know your audience so you could be welcoming? What are the questions you ask? As well as we're going to talk about different events and how to make them welcoming, looking at it pre, during, and after. So first, let's talk about that welcoming piece. And let's hear from our panelists a time when they have not felt welcome. DC, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to write everything down. So in the event industry, I am one of the very few Black women that I've ever come across. So it's always nice to see other people of color in event space. I'm also a DEI champion for ILEA, and I've made it my goal to try to find and seek out folks of color to bring them into this industry. and to promote them as much as I can. So that's one of my personal goals. I grew up as a military kid, and so I have lived all over the world, and there have been many of times that I've walked into a space, and I find that I make myself seen and make myself feel like I belong, no matter what. But at this one event that I went to, and it was actually really recently, I walked in, and there were probably 50 people in a room, and people gather, and we're here to have a good time, and, we're looking at the space and learning about the space, and there was really not one person that spoke to me except for the staff, and that was to ask what I wanted. That's not acceptable. It's not acceptable just as a human being, but it's not acceptable in an event industry where the goal is to be more inclusive and bring people together. And so when I start looking at doing events, just from that one experience, now I know to make sure I do have someone, just like what we did today. There was someone greeting you at the door to welcome you into this space. It's important because then it makes you feel included and feel like you're supposed to be there. And so that's one thing that I would like for everyone to just consider when you are putting on events and, bringing people who don't know each other together into a space. You want me to talk about the flip side? Okay.
Yes.
On the flip side,
Yeah.
I signed up, I registered for another event, which was it was my first time going to this event. And the person who was the event, I don't know what they're called, but I'll just call him an ambassador. He looked me up on LinkedIn, sent me an email, said, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting you. Can't wait to see you. Here's my name. Just know that I'll be there to find you. When I walked in, he knew exactly who I was. He knew exactly, what we had talked about in our chit chats. And he invited me to sit with him at his table. He didn't know me, but that was an inclusive thing. And he didn't have to do that. There was no, reason for him to invite me to sit at his table. But because of that interaction, I actually joined that group because I felt that they wanted me to be part of their community. And so again, like I said, on the flip side, you have someone that's going to welcome you, welcome the new people, have a new person experience so that they feel that this is a community that they should be a part of.
Thank you. Gary, go ahead.
So it's always interesting for me that what we in our early years experience really shapes who we are. And to me, I'm in general more of an introvert, although most people don't feel that way when they talk to me.
Yeah, I don't think so.
But growing up, what was part of my generation was, in order for us to succeed in business, was that you learn to fit in a way and make sure that you camouflage who you are. So my parents actually, in their greatest intention to make sure that I was successful, we made sure that when I was at an early age going to school, did not speak our native language because it was important not to speak with an accent, right? Or be embarrassed by the fact that, you are not speaking English properly. So I went to a school, actually, we carpooled and my mom would drive me an hour outside of where I grew up in South Central LA, out to the valley of Southern California to go to an all-white school where I was the only Asian person. And there wasn't any other person of color, and there was only one other Asian young lady there in the class. So we learned to fit in, but you've always felt othered because you don't look like everyone else. But it shapes who you are about always trying to fit in and always achieving. And I think that they did it with only the best intention to ensure that we're successful, that we eloquently spoke the right English, and that you passed. And I think that many of us in the Asian culture figure out a way to blend and to make sure that we are part of the greater community and not so much make waves in many ways. So that's my upbringing. So I find that many of the things I've done in my career were to find ways to ensure that I was successful, or you overachieve on things in order to be more successful than everyone else, because that just elevated oneself in that way. And just speaking on the other side of it, knowing that, where I felt welcome was, I mentioned to you, I'm part of the LGBT community, and I realized that somebody was forming Meeting Professionals Association focused on the LGBT, so I picked up the phone and literally said, what is this community of people that are just like me? And when you walk into a room of people that are like you feel very instantly like you found your family. It's a very weird thing when you walk into a reception and you're like, oh my God, I found everybody that, I need to find. And so I've become very active. I was an advisory board member, and I'm a founding advisory board member for this association that now has more than 2,000 people. But similar to that, we're trying to find opportunities for us to find space. And I think DC mentioned it, it's about finding space. So when we create and execute meetings, we have to think about it for finding the space for people and where they can find others that can find space. So I feel that that was a really aha moment for me. And so when we build our LGBT MPA, we are creating communities. It's really interesting. The LGBT community is an intersection of many different communities, right? Of different color, gender. So what we want to do is create that welcoming environment. And John was mentioning, the API event profs. Yes, we want to find the others that are API in the organization, but we need the allies. It's the same with our LGBT association. Allies are truly the most powerful members in our association, is because they are able to sometimes see different perspectives and bring a whole different access that sometimes we don't have. So that's kind of a little bit of the othered and now where we find welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary, because that leads to, some of the work that we do with this. Like, I want to give a shout out to Stuart Butler and also Cascadia last year, because one of the things that we've done, if you want to do anything, right, just think about which affinity group you are a part of, and go look at a speaker list, and then start counting through the list, and then say, does this list percentage-wise represent the audience of which the community that it comes from? And in both cases, at the time that we counted, when it was early published, there was 0 API representation. And we went to both leaders in both groups. And this is why, like, the 4 of us are here in front of you right now. And so this is why I'm going to add on to Gary's allyship, right? If you're not Asian Pacific Islander, but you do care about these issues, and whatever group you're affiliated with, that you feel like you want to be an ally too, we need your help, because in our ally is Joan Eisenstadt, right? She's been in the industry a long time. And she's one of our allies. And I was actually working as a producer on one of the conferences, and even I missed it. I just didn't count, right? I was in the middle of doing more, what I thought were the important things, like let's run some rehearsal meetings, let's do some planning, let's do some other parts. And she was the one who pointed out to me. And she is a white Jewish woman who we're forever indebted to in some ways, because she shared that. And over this time I've done this work over the last 2 years, I realized how important allies are. Joan also nominated 3 of us, Jolene, Gary, and myself, for the PCMA Visionary Awards, of which the 3 of us made the finalist list. And we're just happy that we can represent, and I'm happy to announce too, that Gary made it to the final stage of that process. Yeah, thank you, Gary. So I'm also going to add to the other pieces here too, which is I'll take the virtual perspective. So first off, how many of you are loving this in-person reunion, hug fest, right? You're getting to see people. Good, right? Almost universal. That's great. And then how many of you have taken a virtual meeting in the last month? There we go. So I just want to talk about welcoming and unwelcoming on virtual. I once got invited to a BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, People of Color meetup of like training and learning professionals here in the Puget Sound region. And one of my new tells is that if I log into a meeting, right, it's like 5 minutes to go, and it says, the host has another meeting in progress. Or, the host has not started the meeting. I know this meeting's just about to be a train wreck. Right? I'm gonna share a train wreck with you, because that means they're not on, no one's prepared, right? It'd be like inviting someone to your house, right, and not cleaning up and not doing anything, and like 5 minutes to go, you knock on the door, and they're like, "Who are you?" Yeah, oh, you're here. So then what happened is then the meeting then suddenly started, and the host wasn't there. right? I looked through the attendee list, and it's like the attendee list said, there's nobody who is host. I'm like, how did this meeting start? So they have that, there's a switch. You can actually turn on a switch that says you can allow people to start joining, but the host is not there. So there are like 8 or 9 of us, right? We're all Black, Indigenous people of color hanging around here trying to meet. Well, none of us know each other. And so we're confused. It's chaos. We do self-organize, so we actually, like a bunch of us are leaders, so we're like, well, let's introduce yourself. So let's say Rocco's one of the people here, and we start introducing, and so Rocco starts introducing. He says, hi, my name is Rocco, I'm this. Poof. The meeting completely stops. Just flat out ends at that point. And then all of our emails go, ding. Oh, this meeting has been canceled. Because due to technical difficulties. No kidding. Right. And that was our introduction to a networking group where we were all expecting to connect to people like us. I haven't been back to that meeting. And the inverse is in a virtual meeting, use the waiting room so that you can prep. No one wants to see you fix your mic or do your makeup, right, this close to the camera when everyone's here. So use the
from
waiting room.
experience. I see that.
Oh, yes. Good makeup. That's right. And then when you do let people in, the best things that I have seen is music is playing. Like, I love music. It's usually soft so that you can actually talk over it. That someone is there welcoming you, right? Hi, Jolene. Hi, DC. What's up, Gary? Good to see you, right? And then maybe actually somebody shares the agenda. What are we actually going to do today? Sounds simple, all right? Even ChatGPT knows this. If you ask it, what has to happen to have an engaging meeting? ChatGPT will tell you all those things. And yet there are so many people who still don't do them. So those are the things that I would like to see in a virtual meeting. Thanks, Jolie.
Thank you. So I'd like to also give you a first-time experience when I have felt unwelcome. I have so many to choose from. I'm so lucky. I'll give a recent one. And so this is a first-time experience as an Asian American going to a 3,500 convention as a first-timer, and I'm entering a sea of like a fraternity or sorority. People are so excited to see each other, and so they're bringing they're with their teams, their entourages, their friends, their established networks of 30 and 40 years, and I'm new. So it's not, they didn't have time to talk to me, but they weren't mean. It just, there was no intentional design to make sure to catch the first-timers. So I wore my first-timer badge. I'm an extreme extrovert. I wore my first-timer nominee as well. I went to the first-timer mixer. I did all the things. I wore my pink. I wore my gold. I wore my bling. But after 5 days, there were only 4 people who initiated conversation with me. And I think maybe I was lucky because I talked to another Asian American who was the nominee as well, who wore her badge, and she had one person come over to talk to her, initiate conversation. I talked to 2 other Asian Americans who had the similar experience. So you have to plan to be intentional and look at the different audience members, right? Because the marginalized groups have other layers of obstacles on top of just being a first-timer. So I want you to imagine this. Let's see, Monique, can you just stand up? No, it's painless. Just stand up, okay, turn around, okay? And the rest of you, can you start cheering? Yeah. Monique, oh my gosh, Monique! So Monique, how does that feel? They're cheering for you.
Welcoming.
Yeah, okay. Beautiful job, Monique Schultz. So when I was at a conference many, many years ago, I was in the National Speakers Association. I was president for Washington State for 3 years, and they have done a beautiful job. And so imagine that you are in this new place, 3,500 people, you're in the hallway and you're kind of like, oh, I'm late. I don't even know where I'm going. And everybody's hugging everywhere. I don't even know. And then somebody comes up to you and says, hi, I'm Mark Mayberry. You look a little lost. Come over here. I'll escort you to the first time orientation. And then people seriously were yelling my name like, Jolene, come sit with us. Like this whole room. It was incredible. And what happened with this first time orientation, there's maybe 75 people there. The president was there, the board members, and they're sitting at your table and you're meeting everybody at your table and they're telling you what to expect. And hey, people are going to be doing this. Don't worry about it. They're just doing this thing, blah, blah, blah. And people also do this. That means whatever. So they're giving you the insides and you're meeting a lot of people already. And they're suggesting, hey, get a couple of numbers of the first timers. And then there'll also be a board member that will have lunch with you. So this is the way to do it. Just with that one thing, there's a lot more to that, but think about how that experience could be so much better. So that was quite a victory. So next question I have for you is, we've heard a number of these perspectives. Just think of all the perspectives that we're not hearing, that don't have this opportunity that we asked to get. So invite people who have different experiences to the table because there are a lot of ones that are just ignored, and we want probably to invite them in. And just FYI, I mean, the world is changing pretty quickly. And in 2045, the U.S. population will be more than 50% people of color. Bellevue is already 50% people of color and is 36% Asian. Redmond is 38% Asian. Seattle is 16% Asian. So look at these stats. Do we want to reflect the community at least? There is a lot of business out there. So let's now just talk about how do you get to know your audience? If we want to make them feel welcome, how do you get to know who they are? Any of you?
John?
Wow. Yeah, I'll take this one. You know, what I was saying is that, at least in my experience, quite often it's multiple of you out there. And what I mean by that is if you are the meeting professional in charge of an organization or association, you usually know your audience best, right? You put in the relationship time and you know what they're like. And quite often, me as a producer or whatever role that I take, I'm going to lean on that. And so, for instance, some groups are really fun, right? Like if you take MPI and you put a dance floor out there and it's after hours, you're probably going to see a bunch of people dancing. But there's other groups where they're like, that's not the culture of the group. That's like, you need to tone it down a little more, right? Let's find these right speakers. Let's stick a little more to data. So whatever it is, one is you got to get to know your audience. And with that audience, I think you also will discover other pieces around it. So quite often you'll know if somebody has a scooter. You will know if somebody is sight challenged. You'll know if somebody needs American Sign Language, right? And so I believe that if you know your audience, you will know which features or what key aspects that you need to have to be welcoming. And you know, I think if you know your audience too, the more you get to know them, you'll find all those other things, like what are their food preferences, right? Again, one of my good friends is Tracy Stuckrath, and I did a series of webinars with her, and how welcome a group felt when the day before the office tried to make it feel welcoming to come back to the office by buying donuts, when they didn't know that 35% of their group was gluten intolerant. And so the next day, she went out and sourced a top local gluten-free bakery that had specialized in donuts, brought all these donuts, and then clearly labeled them so they knew which things each one had and didn't have. And her feedback immensely changed immediately, and people said, thank you so much for responding to us, for listening to us. We feel welcome. So there are so many of these factors, and you know your audience best. And once you know them, then you should know, how do I design for them so that they will feel welcome at your conference or convention? Others?
Yeah, and speaking of design, just like John said, when you're asking these questions, it all starts with first knowing who they are, but also when you do the registration, if you have a system that allows you to add questions that may not be, the typical ones named, email, food preference. Those, I say seek out those types of registration platforms. There's a couple that are very, very, I want to say, strict on what kind of things you can add to a registration platform. I just did an event where we used one that was lovely. And one of the questions was, do you have any special needs? And somebody said auditory needs. They cannot be in a room with flashing lights, but they still want to be part of the event. So, when you think about setting up a space like that, how do you do that? You bring in someone like John who can actually get the video feed into another room for these people and make them feel included. And I don't say this by, oh, well, we have this closet or we have this room that's, way far away. You want to make that. You still want to make this an engaging and involved room and a intentional space for folks. So, really think about those types of things when you're looking at that space and design. Another thing, I had someone who had a food intolerance, which was to ranch dressing. So when I saw that, of course, I'm like, is that a typo? No, it was serious. And she had a serious reaction to that. So you have to really consider all sorts of types of needs when people are filling those out. So really, really look at those and think of ways to be creative so that they don't feel like they're being made fun of or being excluded because of something that may not be typical when it comes to those types of issues.
And I want to speak from the supplier's perspective as well about the immense responsibility we have and we should have. So in this room, how many of you are planners up here? Like, okay. And how many of our suppliers or venues? Okay. It's interesting. If there's anything we've learned in the past few years is we have to think and do things differently in terms of us being hotel suppliers or venue suppliers, that we really have to understand that the audience and the focus on the attendee becomes the center of what we do. And the suppliers have that responsibility. And I'll speak from on the hotel side that we have to go beyond just the specs of the meeting, right? We're so used to looking at it from the rates, dates, and space aspect, but we have to dive deeper into it. And we have to have those conversations now because meetings need to happen that create different levels of experience. So it was exciting for me to actually come aboard to this company is because we're trying to deliver that through the independent world, right? But more than that, it's about understanding that audience. What is it that they need? What do they need to achieve? There's a very big difference when you look at a program. Is this an incentive program? Is this a retreat? Right? What environment are you setting? Are these people coming together for the first time? So the supplier has to facilitate that, and we have to work better with our meeting professional clients to understand what. And so if you hear the suppliers asking you these questions, it's not to delay the process in any way, but to really understand what they can do to facilitate and create those experiences in that environment for it. So that's why the importance of understanding that audience becomes critical to the success of that program, because we all have the rates, dates, and space, right? But it has to go beyond that now in terms of what we offer as suppliers.
Nice rhyme, thanks. Just rolled right off the tongue. I wanted to say a couple of questions as Asian inclusion consultant. What I ask is, what is it I'm going to ask? What else? Who else is at the convention center or the hotel? I was just at the Gaylord in DC last week, and if I knew if there was any overlap with this one particular other group, I would have canceled my trip. Because I wouldn't have felt safe. The president of this one group wanted to cancel PBS for introducing an Asian American puppet. So the beliefs of this particular group, I just absolutely would not feel safe. So, and there are a lot of different opposing systems out there and different groups. So who is sharing that same space? So that's something I would ask. And do you have any Asian Americans in attendance, or do you want any? Because safety is an issue. So for example, many of you know that March is Women's History Month, and it's Brain Injury Month. Maybe Kim Lee knows that in nursing. But you may not know that today is the second anniversary of the Atlanta murders of the Asian Americans. And so right now, I'm here today, but there are a lot of different events, not celebrating, but talking about resilience and how to survive out there. And so many people don't know that Asian Americans are attacked every single day. And so that's why this does matter. So if you want to attract Asian Americans to your event, know that there are some layers, and security may be one of them. When I went to this other event, I thought, you know what? I'll just go ahead and stay in the hotel. I'll go to the events that are in the hotel because I don't know what's out there and I don't know anybody. So let's just keep it here. So, and you may have, besides Asian Americans, there may be other groups that may not feel comfortable because sometimes they're a target of hate. So those are a couple questions that I make sure to ask. And I would say for the next question is, what other factors can you think of to be intentionally inclusive around pre and during and post? And for example, John mentioned that looking at panels, when you are going to a conference, and Joan trained us, Joan Eisenstadt, to look, ooh, all white. And I'm also looking, are there any Asian Americans? And I got a scholarship to go to this conference, and I had to, the first thing I did is I went to the website. Is there anybody who looks like me? And out of the 30, 40 pictures, none of them. And then looking, 0 out of 73 speakers look like Asian Americans. And then I went to the leadership where there were a few. So that marketing is really important. Reflect, I mean, if you want to bring in new different groups, then you need to reflect that. And let's say you don't have any Asian Americans, might you want, because Asian Americans are growing at the fastest rate and have the fastest growing buying power, so there is, make the highest incomes, there is a benefit, a financial benefit. So DC, do you want to talk about?
Yeah. So what I look for pre-event is I try to always make sure that there's an accessibility for folks with ADA, issues. And I shared this before, but, I did an event that when we did our site visit, one of the things was, do you have an elevator? Is there a way for folks that, have mobility issues, can they make it to the event without feeling like they're othered? And they were like, oh yeah, we have an elevator, it's right out back. They would just park their car and wheel up and push the button and it comes up to the space. I'm like, okay, if that's what you have, we're gonna go with it. Well, then on event day, we get there and we're doing our pre-event walkthrough, and the elevator's broken. And I hate to say I lost my nugget a little bit, but I had to, because someone's got to advocate for people with mobility issues. And so I was like, this is unacceptable. You have to get an elevator repairman here now to fix this. And they're like, well, it's going to cost, I said, it's not going to cost me anything. It's going to cost you a lot. So you need to fix it. And they did. And because of that, the two people, it's only two people, but for those two people, it was a very big deal. And so, so that's one thing that I look for when I'm doing my pre-site visits. Yeah, I think that's enough. Go ahead,
Well,
Bree.
and it's interesting you mentioned that, because as a supplier, we look to ask those questions. It's our responsibility. And some of the things that are passionate to me, I mentioned from the LGBT community perspective, and I applaud this particular center, because if you've noticed, it's very, that the restrooms, there are the gender neutral restrooms that are here, and we have to ask those, because but facilities don't always have that, right? Depending on when they were created, sometimes the hotel will say, well, can't do that, we don't have any. And it's sort of like, well, no, you need as a planner to insist, but as a supplier, we need to be able to be flexible, to work with it, to understand how inclusion is important. So how do we make those opportunities and accessibility inclusion happen? So those are the kinds of things, just from an LGBT perspective, members of our community are often othered in so many ways. So we want to create that level of inclusion, and even gender identity, right? We do not want to not create a safe space for people. And if I present as a man, it's different for others in different parts of our LGBT community. So we really have to be understanding and make those accommodations. So I often look at that's the one thing I always do when I go into it. I go, gosh, they don't have that gender neutral restroom. So I wonder how that person feels if they're not able to have that feeling of safety when they just go to use a simple restroom, right? And so it just ties into that whole accessibility, the inclusion conversation to me felt welcome. So.
Thanks, Gary. Let's see, too, if you haven't noticed some of the features of this place, who here has actually seen or been in the wellness room?
Ooh.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, it was you. So you thought it was awesome, right? And so we were here a month ago in the walkthrough when they opened this location, and that was one of their highlights was they had toured 10 of the top most recent facilities like this and expansions. And that was one of the pieces of feedback that they got, that the wellness room was really one of these things that often was not provided. And so, yeah, so I invite you to go look at these things, because I think that really the other message, if you want to figure out what it's like, be one of these people. And what I mean by that is, here's my experience. How many of you have ever been in a motorized scooter before? 1, 2, wow, holy cow. Way more than I thought. I once had an injury. I had a leg injury and I was on crutches, and I was about to do a 6-day conference at the Las Vegas Cosmopolitan. Listen to that, right? Everybody knows it. If you don't know what we're talking about, the Cosmopolitan feels like one of the biggest hotels in Vegas across 5 to 6 floors. And imagine now crutching 30,000 steps a day. And I was just trying to decide, oh my gosh, I have this coming up. What am I going to do? And then I go, it's Vegas. I could get a scooter. I could probably get an oxygen tank if I really wanted one. And so I called the hotel, and they're like, yeah, sure, here's a scooter for a week, $130. I'm like, it's amazing. What happened after that, I feel like, was one of the best educations I ever got. From simple things like at Starbucks, the way they had arranged the stanchions to go through the line, it was impossible for me to do a U-turn to get to my coffee. To the stares that I got being a 50-year-old looking like relatively healthy male in a scooter going, what the hell? Like, you can just hear the internal conversations. Who are you? And like, what the hell are you doing in that scooter? All right, and just picture the scene, right? There's probably about 12 people in the elevator, and they part the seas like Moses. And then they like let you in. And then they all kind of stare at you. And then they stare away, like, because it's elevator music going, I'm not supposed to look, right? And now, you don't know which one. Do you see, like, am I supposed to be here or am I supposed to be invisible? I don't know. My favorite one, though, is that I got into one of the nightclubs. So I drove in early so I could, like, see the place. But the problem is that the place filled up. And now I needed to leave. And so literally they had 2 bouncers move people out of my way to drive a scooter out of one of Las Vegas's Cosmopolitan's nightclub. But what was great about that experience is that I learned so much about what would an attendee feel like if they were in a scooter. So simple things. Another one, I'm going to go back to Tracy Stuckrath, who said, go to your food and beverage. Get one of these chairs like this, stick it next to it, sit in it, and try and access all the food. Her favorite one was the bagels were across the toaster, which means that when you reach across to get a bagel, your arm is over the now hot toaster. And she just said all of those things were like inaccessible. Going back to the virtual aspect here, you know, it was great. Sean and I actually were doing an interview today, and we said, when we have to do a hybrid, what are our first, like, 3 questions? And they were like, you know, how many people is it? Is it virtual let's see. How many people is it? Are people going to participate both virtual and in person, or just in person, right? And what's the tech like in the building? And so here are some of the virtual things to think about. Again, is it virtual or in person? If it is a hybrid, ask for a site tour immediately. Just my last program, we asked for a site tour for the place, and the client assumed that they had cameras. And when they went to go talk to the client, they suddenly discovered that the client has no cameras available for the hybrid, and they did not account for that in their budget. So they had to hire another person. So things like that. What languages are supported? This is a great one now in virtual. It is even easier today now to run a multilingual. It feels like the UN. It is awesome, doesn't cost a lot to put a language interpreter. So look for what languages are supported. Live or automated captions, right? There is a difference, although automated has gotten much better. Sign language, things like Zoom now have actually built-in features so people can choose to see or not see and how to see the sign language interpreter around with that. And I'll just go to the last piece on the hybrid, is really think about the experience from both sides. If you're an in-person audience, how do you see what's going on and how do you ask the question? And in a virtual audience, again, what do you see, right? Like this, what we did here is a favor for the virtual people. We felt these were a little too, not bright enough, so we brought our own lighting to enhance this even more, ideally for the virtual audience. That was something done for them. And then again, how does that virtual ask questions if it is a live audience? So all of those, I think, are great things to think about.
So John was talking about he got the experience because he was in a scooter, and he got a good experience. And our friend Joan Eisenstadt, when she was in her scooter, the elevator went 5 times because people didn't wait for her. They just went in front of her. And just to go to the bathroom, like it's such a big place that there's turnover, so the person didn't know where an accessible bathroom was, so she had to wait. And it's just like, this is a pillar in our community, and she has to suffer like that. It's terrible. Okay, gather myself. I wanted to share a little bit about marketing. When you talk about DEI, I see crayon box, I see pencils, I see colored paintbrushes. John Reese, I'm going to talk about you later, but go. I know. Thank you so much for being here. So remember this face here. So when you think of diversity, equity, inclusion, humanize us, right? Not by a crayon box or pencils or paintbrushes. Try and use real faces. There's people in this room, we have different faces. So that's something, because many of us are dehumanized, so try and use actual humans to represent real humans. And then I was going to mention speakers. So in terms of using welcoming languages, when you say, oh, why don't you take a stab at it? Take a shot at it. As an Asian American who reports on stabbings of Asian Americans, when I hear stab, I envision the person, the Asian I saw stabbed yesterday. And when I hear shot, I think of the Black person that was shot by the cop the other day. So when you think of language, I use violent language all the time because I'm talking about violence, but think about your words, because it can be kind of triggering, and I imagine visions for that.
Jolene, can I add one here?
Go ahead.
I got challenged 3 years ago to get rid of guys from the stage, and I think I'm very close and successful for it. So think about the times when you've heard either yourself or other speakers, hey guys, right? I have tried very hard to remove that from all of my pieces, and that's a very simple, intangible thing to do, but watch how prevalent it still is today. Thanks, Jolene.
True. And to add to that, when as speakers, so what I'm saying, like at an event, maybe you're doing some speaker training and you have some guidelines for your speakers, have them use different names instead of Bob, Gary, and my dad's name, and Don. How about Ileana and Tung and Nok and other names that people are not familiar with them, to get more familiar. So because people can't say, for example, the last name Nguyen, if you can Nguyen, that if you can say that Nguyen, then that's like 70% of the Vietnamese people in the entire world. And if you are a recruiter, you're going to sound a little bit more culturally competent. And Seattle, it is important because it is pretty Asian here. Other things to share with speakers: pronounce names correctly. Make the effort. Make the effort to make a mistake in order to show you respect. I practice Kolani. Kolani. So that is the Swahili name in South Africa. I had him record it. I watched his mouth. I mean, this is a different situation, but I practiced for like 2 months to be able to click at the same time. Make the effort, and because I would say a lot of Asians and many others, they just let themselves be renamed because it's too hard. It's too hard. And so give them respect to try and pronounce their names. So other aspects you'd like to address?
One thing I just wanted to say is when you're looking at site visits, I missed this part, sorry. When you're considering a place outside of Washington State, think about things like safety for your guest. You know, just like what Jolene said about, you know, there's a lot of Asian violence going on, Asian hate. You know, some people may not feel comfortable if your meeting is now in a state that does not fully represent some of those beliefs. So, you know, healthcare laws are important when you think about where you're going to be doing your meetings. Put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. ADA laws, not everybody has the same thing that Seattle has. LGBTQ laws are not the same everywhere. And so I just want to say, think about those things when you are considering where to take your group, because it does, intentionality does matter when you are looking for these places.
And you may make the news also. If something happens at your hotel, you may make the news that, anyways, okay.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned that about where we choose to do our meetings. And as an industry, and as someone who's been involved in different industry organizations, we as an industry do not advocate boycotts and bans in general because it's not a great practice to do. Now, there's an understanding where rather than boycotting, you proactively may book your business at a different location. There's some understanding of safety is a big one. So there is an understanding why certain organizations, companies choose not to go somewhere for the safety of the people that are attending. And it's something to keep in mind because as an overall industry, what we need to do is if there is not a choice in booking the location, what do we do to open the conversation about where you book that meeting? So it's not, and again, it's not about not booking that destination or that venue or the hotel. You really have to think with intentionality. If I'm going to go there, what do I do to impact for good? There is still a community. For example, let's just use the LGBT community. LGBT people exist in every city, in every state, and it may not be welcoming in terms of laws that have in those states, but by not booking your program or meeting there, you do create and impact the people that are the lives of the community that you really do want to support. So how do you create it to ensure that whether it's a CSR, whether you focus on off-site venues or support that local community? It's just an example of what we do in terms of overall boycotts and bans, right? I mean, we don't not go somewhere because of that. And then just as another thing from a hotel's perspective, we need to really look at some of the things that we do and challenge your suppliers to really look at some of the things, especially with food and beverage. Catering is such a big part of it, right? And when you go into it, it's surprising to me how many conferences and events we go to where things aren't labeled really well, right? They just quickly put it out or they don't put anything in there. So you were talking about the gluten-free thing, but unless you really label it, I don't know if you've seen it change. I still have yet to see it really change to be educated in a way that people understand, right? It's a matter of health for them, right? People could get very sick, as you mentioned. So we really need to, how many times do you sit there and go, well, what was that in there? And again, does it have this in it? Well, if you have, and then sometimes go, let me go find out for you, right? And that's usually the answer. They should know that, right? What is going into that food. And what about, this is the one thing that always irks me, is if you're a vegetarian, you ask for a special dish and you're at a banquet, who gets served last, right? Everybody gets their meal, but the special one certainly gets the meal last, and then everyone sort of stares at you and you're made to feel like you're really the one holding everybody else up. And it should be done in a much more inclusive way so that people are not feeling like they're othered because they have special needs and stuff. So I'm just giving you a few examples from a hotel's perspective where we have that responsibility to be able to be better at that. And I think we are. But as an industry, if you all as planners don't start insisting on that, then if you're not asking it, then they're not going to necessarily deliver it on their own. So.
I have a question for John before he speaks. And if you have, we can field a couple of questions after John. Shelby, Monet, hello, welcome. So let's go to virtual events for a second. One of the events that Linda Brandt, it's a Lean In event. It's a global one. And what she does, she is a white lady, and what she has, maybe there's 60 or 70 people. She says, people not from this country, not from the US, speak first, and then people of color. So it's kind of like that to make sure that the white voices are not always primary. So that's how that rolls. How do you get more participation on their virtual calls?
Well, first I want to add on to Gary's story, and then I'll add that piece, which is I also heard a story where a woman CEO who was a vegetarian asked for a special meal and got 3 steamed carrots. She owned the company, people. So the responsibility's there. Now, on the virtual side, in what I have seen in hybrid, which has worked, is the virtual gets to ask questions first. So it's a little bit like using the same ordering technique that you have, is that to allow the virtual to have people first. Our best practice too, our studies show that 80% of virtual conferences or hybrid conferences right now are not using a virtual MC. Right? Like Jolene here is moderating for us today, and you can tell, see, the whole program for these 57 minutes has been smooth because we're in a guide and a direction and things are going on. And so that MC can also help generate those questions from that virtual audience before it comes time to do that. And that's something that we see even large and well-known organizations have forgotten. But I just want to make sure that each of you get a tip too, that you can walk away here that you can enact. And that tip is the first 5 minutes of your meeting are the most important. The first 5 minutes. Think about, what we did here for those who were here even pre-show. And you'll see some of the things that we did, right? It's still a little bit of candy up here in the front.
They're called seat incentives, and I roped off the chairs.
I call it audience bait.
These are
Audience
all
bait.
right. These are all smile techniques. But my favorite part about most of the techniques that we use today is that they didn't cost anything.
Couple of smiles here and there, Hello, Ari, how's it going, Taylor?
Right. Greet people at the door. Try and figure out how to connect them to somebody else. Right. These are the things that we're looking for, and make sure you get something that you came here for about welcoming events. And to me, while it's really nice to sit here on stage and talk about them, all 4 of us would rather show you. We are in the hospitality business, and showing you is one of our strongest way. I'll close with this great story. I was in the Bellagio with the great Angel Hansen, who is in the building, and the 2 of us were lugging a lot of equipment for closing up a part of a show. And a gentleman who we were in the hallway a long way from our car or the Uber station that we were trying to get to, and he comes up and he goes, "Hi, can I help you?" And I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, we're trying to get this to the Uber station, which we've already walked before, and we know it's like another 12, 15 minutes. And he goes, oh my gosh, I would love to be able to help you out. Turns out that he was the VP of food and beverage. He was off on his break, and he offered to cut us through a side door and actually drive us to our next venue himself personally. Angel and I have never forgotten that, and she continues to be at this date a fan of the Bellagio. So think about that for all of you. What are you doing in your first 5 minutes, and what could you do even better when we see you next time? Jolene?
Thank you. So think of your last things you'd like to share. And I wanted to mention how to make something welcoming with people power. And I was so lucky when I was going to that big convention. We have Sean in the audience. Raise your hand, okay? And then we had John Reese, the tall guy who was here, both AV guys who have been in the business for a very long time. And before I went to that event, I felt so comfortable. It was 4 hours. We were talking about all sorts of stuff, and I was listening. And they also share with me stories of growing up, because people who are inclusive and inviting, it's their parents who have shaped them a lot of the times. And I got to hear who they are, and I felt very safe. And throughout the convention, they came over and chatted with me, spent time with me, introduced me to people. And Gary Murakami, oh my goodness, butterfly popping around. It's just like a dose of Gary. I just met 10 people, and then he's very talks everybody up, and so everybody feels all happy and like, woo! And so these are some folks who made my trip so much better, because it would have been terrible from my experience. Even though it was a good event, my personal experience was hard, right? But having people like Sean and John and Murakami out there just lifted me up and, kind of held it in there.
Oh, sure. So I just want to say, for my own self, intentionality matters, inclusion matters. Look around. This is our community. Get to know each other. Take a moment to meet someone new. I know this is the end of the event, but when you're out networking and meeting people in our industry, take a moment to get to know some of the other people that you may not have had a chance to meet before, and be intentional with your vendor selection, with your industry partners. There are people out there that are struggling, that could use a little help, that people don't know about. And, take a moment to meet someone that you may not have ever had the opportunity to meet before, and bring them into your community, into your network. And you might find a new friend for life.
And just for me, just as a comment to close my comment is about think about it as a journey, right? When we're creating welcoming meetings or you're designing your meeting, you don't have to go and be all the way on the spectrum. Any step that you take on this journey moves us towards more inclusive and more welcoming meetings. So take that first step and know that it's a journey. So and you'll get to the destination of creating that. So I encourage you to take that journey forward.
And I wanted to also add that Asian Americans, put them in DEIA-B. We need to be in there. We are part of that group, so invite us in. That's your part as Asian Asian inclusivity, and that's our Joan, white lady, bringing us in, who has that voice. So bring us in. And you probably know Everywhere All at Once, and Michelle Yeoh and Kei Hui Kwan, they're out there and they're championing, and they're saying it has taken 40 years to be seen and heard. So don't, let's make that a little quicker, and let's amplify our voices, not just Asians, but other voices as well. And a great way to really step into this is May. May is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Heritage Month. What are you doing? What are your companies doing? Let's make sure it's not just takeout and a lion dance. How can we learn, right? Because with a lion dance and takeout food, how authentic is it? What are they doing? It's so foreign. Wow. We don't know what they're doing. How about education, where we learn how Asian Americans are part of America and see the similarities and appreciate the differences, but not, less as foreigners. So I've got lots of ideas on that, happy to share. We've had 4 voices up here sharing our personal stories, and there's much more to it. Just think of all the voices that are not heard and really go out to seek what their voices are, so you can build around that, because this world is very positive. It is changing very quickly, and we need to be more inclusive. So let's give them a round of applause. So DC Evans, Gary Murakami, and John Chen, Jolene Jang, our QR codes are there, and we're all on LinkedIn. Feel free to email me for a resource page. You can get next week and API Event Profs hashtag. We have 2 meetings every month. Allies Really Wanted, and you are free to go, and we're also here to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you.